The hatch was already open by the time the alarm started screaming. I had been watching that panel for 11 months. 11 months of pretending to sleep near the waterfall, of listening to the water roll over the rocks, of counting the seconds between each cycle of the maintenance light that blinked behind the moss. 11 months of memorizing the rhythm of a door that was never supposed to be found by something like me. I was not supposed to be the kind of thing that found doors. That was the whole point, actually. The Vath, the ones who built this place, the ones who collected us, they believed that humans were curious, yes, social, yes, but fundamentally gentle. Pre-conflict, they called us in their reports. I had read one of those reports once, through the glass, when a Vath technician had left a data slate face up on a bench just outside the observation corridor. I could not read their language, but I had watched enough of them work to understand that the document had a number on it, a rating, and ours was very low. They were not wrong about most of us. 40 years inside a climate-controlled habitat will do something to people. It will soften things. The oldest among us, the ones who had actually been born on Earth, had a look in their eyes sometimes, early in the mornings, when the dome lights were still warming up and the fake sky was still gray. A look like they were trying to remember something they had left in another room. But by the time the light turned gold and the bird sounds started playing through the ceiling speakers, the look would be gone, replaced by the ordinary business of the day. Feeding, talking, raising children who had never once looked up and wondered why the clouds never moved, the way real clouds move. I had been born here in the habitat, 23 years ago, in a building they had given us near the eastern tree line. My mother had given me the name Kale. She said it was a name her own grandmother had carried, from somewhere in the north of England, from a time when people still had places to be from. She used to say it quietly sometimes, like a prayer. She did not explain what she was praying for. I knew by the time I was 6 that the dome above us was not the sky. By the time I was 12, I knew what we were, not because anyone told me. The adults worked very hard not to say it plainly, but I was a child with time and a habit of noticing things. I noticed that the tall beings who walked the corridor on the other side of the glass were not interested in us the way you are interested in something equal to you. They were interested in us the way you are interested in something you have placed somewhere safe. They watched us with a kind of satisfied patience. They made notes. They pointed at children playing and discussed the notes with each other. They never once waved back when we waved. I also noticed the feeding schedule. The way supplies appeared through sealed ports in the western wall every 4th morning, already sorted, already packaged, without explanation or instruction. The way the water in the river had a faint taste on certain days, slightly sweet in a way that no one else seemed to notice. The way some of the older people slept very deeply on those days. I stopped drinking from the river when I was 14. I found a spring near the northern slope that fed from a different source. Closer to the dome wall, it tasted like nothing. It tasted clean. I did not tell anyone. That sounds terrible. I have thought about it many times since, but I was 14, and I had no language yet for what I suspected. And I was afraid that if I said it out loud, someone would look at me, the way people look at someone who is going to cause a problem. And I could not afford to be a problem, not yet. The years between 14 and 23 were the years of learning to be invisible, while watching everything. I learned the patrol cycles of the Vath maintenance workers. They came through the habitat in small crews, 2 or 3 at a time, always from the same access point behind the waterfall at the base of the northern cliff face. They wore full environmental suits when they entered, as if the air we breathed was dangerous to them. Maybe it was. They did their work quickly and without looking at us directly, the way you might move through a room where something is sleeping that you do not want to wake. They fixed the irrigation lines, adjusted the ceiling panels, tested the water chemistry. Then they left through the same panel they had entered from. The panel had a locking mechanism on their side, a flat hand pressure plate set into the rock. I had watched them use it through a narrow gap in the waterfall's edge, crouching in the spray for 2 hours on a cold morning, until I had seen the sequence clearly enough to hold it in my memory. 3-point contact, left side, right side, center in that order. 1 second between each touch. I spent 4 months after that building the tool I would need. Not something complex, nothing that required materials I did not have. A flat piece of smooth bark, shaped by grinding it against stone in the evenings, fitted to the dimensions I had estimated from memory. A handle of braided vine. Something I could press flat against a surface with 3 controlled points of contact. I told no one, not my mother, not the few people my age who I was close to, not anyone the morning I decided to go. I woke before the dome lights came on. I left my sleeping mat and walked north in the dark along the river, following the sound of the water. The habitat was quiet around me. I could hear night insects singing in the trees, or rather the speakers in the trees doing a very good impression of night insects. Even now, even knowing I had to admit the impression was excellent, I reached the waterfall. The spray was cold. I pressed myself into the gap behind the flow and found the panel by touch, running my fingers along the rock until I felt the flat seam of it. I placed the tool against it, left contact, right contact, center contact, 1 second between each. The panel opened. The alarm started screaming a full 3 seconds later, which told me something important. The Vath had never considered the possibility that what was inside might open the door from the wrong side. Their alarm was on a delay. It was designed for something trying to force the door, not something that already knew the code. The 3-second gap was not a security feature. It was an error, a blind spot built from certainty. I was through the hatch before the third pulse of the alarm had finished sounding. On the other side was a corridor, narrow, low-lit, running in both directions along the outer wall of the habitat. The air hit me like a wall of cold, clean and sharp, and completely without the softness of recycled habitat atmosphere. It smelled like metal and something faintly chemical and something else underneath that I had no name for. It smelled like outside, not Earth outside, something larger than that. I pulled the hatch shut behind me. The alarm cut out. I stood very still in the corridor and breathed. There were no Vath visible in either direction. The corridor was lit by strips of pale blue light running along the ceiling. Pipes and conduits lined the walls. It was purely functional, purely mechanical. It looked nothing like the careful, curated beauty of the habitat. It looked like the back of a stage set. It looked like the truth. I turned left. I had no reason to choose left over right, except that the floor panels in that direction showed slightly more wear, suggesting more foot traffic, suggesting more station, suggesting more of whatever was beyond this maintenance corridor. I walked quickly, keeping close to the wall, listening. I was 23 years old. I had lived my entire life inside a dome approximately 2 kilometers wide. I had no map, no weapon, no plan beyond the next 30 seconds. I felt, for the first time in my life, completely awake. Behind me, through the wall, I could hear the habitat, faint, muffled, but there. Bird sounds beginning, dome light swarming. The ordinary morning of a place that did not know one of its occupants had just walked out. I kept walking. I did not look back. I want to be clear about something. I was afraid. I was genuinely physically afraid, in the way that makes your hands go cold and your hearing sharpen until you can hear your own heartbeat over everything else. But fear is not the same as hesitation. I had spent 9 years learning the difference. Fear tells you the situation is real. Hesitation is what you do when you have not already decided. I had decided 11 months ago. The first morning I had seen the maintenance light behind the waterfall and thought, quietly and without drama, that is a door. I had just walked through it. Whatever came next was going to be honest. Whatever came next was going to be real. And after 23 years of birds that were not birds, and clouds that did not move and stars painted on a ceiling, real was the only thing I had ever truly wanted. I made it 300 meters down the maintenance corridor before I heard them coming. Not a patrol, something faster. The sound of a Vath in a hurry is very different from the sound of one at work. At work they move with deliberate, measured steps, each foot placed carefully, their joints making a soft clicking sound like a large bird walking on pavement. In a hurry, that rhythm breaks. The clicking becomes uneven, and the footfalls heavier, and you can hear the faint mechanical whine of their environmental suit, fans spinning up to handle the increased body heat. I heard 2 suits coming from the right around a curve in the corridor I had not yet reached. I had maybe 8 seconds. The wall to my left had a recessed panel, not unlike the habitat hatch, but larger and differently shaped. Not a hand pressure lock, a sliding mechanism with a grip bar. I grabbed it and pulled it opened onto a dark space. I went in and pulled it shut behind me. I was in a storage compartment. It was small and completely dark, and packed with equipment I could not see, but could feel hard containers, bundled cable, something soft wrapped in a material that crinkled faintly when I pressed against it. I pressed myself into the back corner and held my breath. The footfalls passed, 2 sets of them, fast in the direction I had come from, heading toward the habitat hatch. The alarm I had triggered had brought them. They would find the hatch closed, relocked from the inside by the mechanism I had activated when I pulled it shut. They would find no sign of forced entry. They would find a door that, according to their own system, had not been opened. I gave them 4 minutes. Then I opened the storage compartment and stepped back into the corridor. This is the thing about being built by certainty. When the Vath designed their systems, they designed them for what they expected. They expected docile species that would not explore, that would not plan, that would not use maintenance hatches as escape routes, because they had never been told what was on the other side. They had designed every system on the station for the inhabitants they believed they had. They had not designed it for me. I did not know this fully yet. I was learning it in real time, one corridor at a time as I moved deeper into the station. The maintenance corridor eventually opened into a larger service passage, and the service passage opened into something that stopped me completely, for the first time since I had come through the hatch. I stepped through a doorway and found myself standing on a narrow, elevated walkway looking out over the interior of the station. It was enormous. Not enormous the way the habitat was enormous. The habitat's size was designed to comfort. This was something else entirely. The central atrium of the station stretched so far in both directions that I could not see the ends. It rose above me in a series of open levels connected by transport lanes where small vehicles moved in smooth, silent arcs. Below me, the floor level was alive with movement. Dozens of species going about the business of a functioning city, Vath in their pale suits. Other beings I had no names for, some bipedal, some not, moving with the ordinary confidence of people who lived here, who belonged here, who had never questioned whether this place was theirs. It smelled of cooked food and mechanical oil and something floral I could not identify. It sounded like a city. It sounded like life happening at a scale I had never been allowed to witness. I gripped the railing of the walkway and looked out, and felt the full weight of what I had not known. Not just the 40 years of my people living in a dome. The 40 years of this, going on without us, just on the other side of the wall. A civilization so large and so established that a missing exhibit animal would register as a minor security incident, not a crisis. Something to be collected and returned, not something to be concerned about. I was in that moment very small, then I took a breath, and I thought about what I was actually looking at: a city. A city with systems and patterns and routines, with supply chains and service corridors and maintenance schedules, with levels of authority and levels of access, with workers who moved through it invisibly because they were expected to be there, and therefore were not looked at carefully. I looked down at myself. I was wearing the plain gray clothing that was standard in the habitat, not unlike what the worker-class beings on the floor below were wearing. Similar enough in color, at least. Similar enough in the quality of plainness. I had a long way to go, but I had made it this far by watching and waiting and learning what others did. Not expect me to know. I started watching again. There were beings on the floor level who moved with less confidence than the Vath, smaller, different shaped, wearing the same gray. They carried equipment and delivered packages and cleaned surfaces, and performed every function that kept the larger operation running without being looked at by the larger operation. I watched them for nearly 20 minutes from the walkway, learning the routes they took, the way they timed their movement to the flow of the larger crowd, the way they kept their eyes low. Then I saw one of them look up, not at the crowd, up at me, directly at me, standing on the maintenance walkway in gray clothing, clearly not Vath, clearly not one of the usual maintenance crew. The being was small, gray-skinned, with large pale eyes and a face that was arranged in what I can only describe as a state of maximum alarm. We looked at each other for a long moment. Then it looked away quickly and continued walking. I watched where it went. It turned into a service alcove along the left wall of the atrium and disappeared. I moved along the walkway, keeping it in sight, until I found the access stairs that led down to the floor level. I descended them slowly, matching the pace of two Vath maintenance workers who passed me without a second glance, and walked to the alcove. The small gray being was inside, stacking containers onto a trolley. It heard me come in and went completely still. I said nothing for a moment. I was aware that I did not know its language, did not know its name, did not know whether it was capable of alerting the Vath faster than I could move. I was also aware that it had looked directly at me from the floor level, and then looked away without raising any alarm. That was a choice. That meant something. I held up my hands, palms out, the universal gesture that I hoped was at least somewhat universal. It stared at me. Its breathing was fast and shallow. Then, very slowly, it reached into a pocket of its gray uniform and held out something small and flat, a translation chip. I recognized the technology. The Vath used them when their researchers entered the habitat. I had seen them used. I took it, placed it against my ear the way I had seen them do, and felt a faint warmth as it settled. It said in a voice barely above a whisper, "You are from Exhibit 7. "Yes," I said, "you are outside Exhibit 7. It looked at me with those large, pale eyes for a long moment. Then it said something that I have thought about many times since, because it was not what I expected. It said, "How long have you been planning this?" 9 years, I said. It was quiet again. Then it made a sound that I would later learn was the equivalent of a short, disbelieving laugh. It said, "My name is Zeth. I have been planning something similar for 11 years and I have not yet managed even the first step." I looked at him, small, gray, standing in a service alcove with a trolley full of containers, 11 years of something unfinished sitting behind his eyes. "My name is Kale," I said. "What is your first step?" He told me. I listened, and in the quiet of that service alcove, surrounded by the hum and movement of a civilization that had decided what both of us were worth, we made the first agreement between two beings who had both been told, in different ways, that they did not count. Outside, the station continued its enormous business. Inside the alcove, something new had begun. 3 weeks after the day I walked out of the habitat, the VATH revised their internal threat assessment of Exhibit 7 residents. I know this because Zeth told me he had access, in his work, to the lower tiers of the station's administrative network. Nothing classified. Nothing that the VATH considered sensitive. The kinds of documents that get left in places workers can see because workers are not considered a security concern. Personnel logs, maintenance schedules, incident reports, and threat assessments for the station's biological collections. The original entry for Exhibit 7, humans, had read, Threat Index .3 category, pre-conflict, socially organized, non-aggressive. Recommendation, standard containment, minimal monitoring. The revised entry 3 weeks after my escape read, Threat Index 1.1, category, limited threat potential, single confirmed escape. Recommendation, increased perimeter monitoring, review of maintenance access protocols. I read it in the alcove where Zeth and I had started meeting every second evening. I read it and felt something that was not quite pride and not quite anger. It was something more specific. It was the feeling of being seen accurately for the first time. 1.1, they had raised it from 0.3 to 1.1. I decided then to help them keep raising it. The weeks since my escape had been an education that no habitat could have provided. The station was called the VATH Arc Station, designation Compound 7, and it was one of 17 such structures spread across this region of the galaxy, each one carrying between 40 and 200 preserved species. The VATH had been building them for 300 years. They were very proud of them. In their public communications, the one Zeth had shown me, they described the ARC stations as the greatest act of conservation in galactic history. The preservation of biodiversity across a universe that was, they said, rapidly losing it. They were not wrong that species were disappearing. They were wrong about almost everything else. What they had built was not conservation. Conservation implies that the thing you are preserving has a say in the matter. What they had built was a collection. A very large, very comfortable, very carefully maintained collection of beings who had not agreed to be collected. Zeth's people, the Gen he called them, had been collected 60 years ago. They were a small species, highly intelligent, with a gift for mechanical systems and spatial memory that the VATH found useful enough to exploit in the service areas of the station while keeping their world under supervision. The Gen were not in an exhibit. They were in a different kind of enclosure, one with job assignments and scheduled rest periods, and the persistent understanding that any disruption to operations would result in consequences that were never specified but always implied. Zeth had been 11 years old when he first started mapping the station's service corridors in his head, building a mental model of every passage and junction and access point, waiting for a moment that never quite arrived. When he saw me on that walkway, he had recognized immediately that what he was looking at was not a moment, it was a choice. Someone had made a choice that he had not yet been able to make, and the fact that it was possible changed the entire shape of things. I understood him very well. We were the same kind of person. Over the following weeks we built something. Not a plan, not yet. A foundation. Zeth taught me the station's geography with the thoroughness of someone who had been memorizing it for more than a decade. The layout of the levels, the location of the security stations, the timing of the shift changes, the parts of the station where VATH presence was light because the work there was considered beneath their attention. I learned it the way I had learned the habitat, through repetition and patience and the particular attention of someone with nothing to do but watch. I also learned the station's social structure, which was more complicated than I had initially understood. The VATH were not one unified thing. They had their own internal hierarchies, their own competing interests, their own political tensions that played out in small, visible ways if you knew how to look. The curators, who managed the ARC collections, answered to the High Compact Council. The administrators, who ran the station's operational systems, answered to a different division. The security forces had their own chain. These divisions did not always cooperate smoothly. There were meetings that ended with raised voices. There were corridor conversations that stopped abruptly when a member of a different department walked past. Zeth had been watching these tensions for years. He understood them with the precision of someone whose survival depended on reading the room correctly. The curators do not share access logs with the security division, he told me one evening. They consider the exhibits their domain. Security is for the public areas of the station. The curators handle their own monitoring. Which means the curators are the ones looking for me, I said. Yes, and they are looking for one human in a habitat, not one human in the general population of a 12-level station. How long before they think to look wider? They already think you are dead, Zeth said. The habitat reports that your body was not found. The curator's current theory is that you entered a restricted access area through the maintenance hatch and were overcome by the atmospheric differential. I processed this for a moment. They think the outside air killed me. Yes. They think I died within 20 minutes of escaping, because I could not breathe the air. The atmospheric mix on this level is 17% different from the habitat composition. For most exhibit species, that would be fatal. I had noticed the difference when I first came through the hatch, the cold, sharp smell. I had assumed it would be an obstacle. Instead, my lungs had simply adjusted over the first few minutes. The way I had read that human lungs adjusted to altitude, to new environments. To change it had been uncomfortable. It had not been fatal. I had not thought much of it at the time. Now I thought about it very carefully. The VATH had not tested what happened when humans breathe station air. They had assumed, from their general data on enclosed species, that the differential would be too large to survive. They had filed it under confirmed outcome and closed the investigation. They had not been wrong about the differential. They had been wrong about the human response to it. Update their assessment, I said quietly. What do they think I am capable of right now as of today? Zeth pulled up the file. Threat Index 1.1, Single Escape, Presumed Deceased. Case Closed. Capability Assessment, Limited. Primary note. Subject demonstrated sufficient intelligence to locate maintenance access and operate. Locking mechanism. No further threat projected. I sat with that for a long moment. They think the hardest thing I did was open a door, I said. Yes. They do not know about you. No. They do not know about this network you have been building for 11 years. They do not even know it exists. I am a maintenance worker. I am everywhere on this station, and I am invisible to everyone on this station. I looked at him. Zeth, how many Gen work on this station? 417. How many of them want what you want? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, all of them. But wanting and being willing to act are two different things. They are afraid. They have families here. They know what the implied consequences are. What would change that, I asked. Proof, he said. Proof that it could work. Proof that the VATH are not, in fact, invincible. Proof that something they believed was contained and finished could stand in front of them and still be breathing. I understood. I had been that proof for 3 weeks and I had not yet used it. I had been surviving, that was necessary. But surviving alone was not enough. Surviving alone was exactly what the VATH's threat assessment predicted. One escapee, living in the margins, declining to 0 threat as resources ran out. I needed to be seen not by the VATH, by Zeth's people, by the other worker-class species on this station who moved through its corridors with their eyes low. Where is the most visible place on this station, I said, that the VATH security team cannot reach in under 4 minutes? Zeth thought about it. Then he told me. The next morning out into the central atrium of the ARC station at shift change, when the floor was most crowded, and I stood in the middle of it and I looked up. I stood there for 6 full minutes. I made no attempt to hide. I looked at the levels above me, at the transport lanes, at the ceiling far above with its own lights that were not painted stars. I looked at it the way you look at something that belongs to you now, even if you have not yet finished taking it. Around me, the worker-class beings of 12 different species saw me standing there, unhidden, uncaptured, alive. On the 4th minute, a VATH security patrol entered the atrium from the east corridor. They saw me. I saw them see me, then I walked, not ran. Walked into the west service passage that Zeth had mapped for me, through 2 maintenance bins, up a ladder, through a ventilation access, and I was gone before they reached the spot where I had been standing. The threat assessment was updated to 2-4 that evening. Zeth told me the Gen maintenance staff had talked of almost nothing else all day. I sat in the dark of a storage compartment and thought about my next move. And for the first time since I had come through the hatch, I allowed myself the beginning of something that was not just survival, it was strategy. It was the early shape of a plan that was much larger than one person and one door and one escape. I thought about the message I wanted to send back to the habitat. Not to the Vath, to my people. I thought about what I would say, and how I would say it, and what it would mean for the people inside to hear from someone who had walked out. One line. That was all it needed to be. I spent 3 days composing it in my head until it was exactly right. I sent it on the 4th day through the communication relay that Zeth had. Quietly mapped 11 years ago and never yet used. It said, "The door is open. Remember what we are. I do not know who heard it first. I do not know what their face looked like when they did. I only know what happened next, which was that 3 days later the Vath Emergency Security Council convened, and the threat assessment for Exhibit 7 was updated to 6.7, which Zeth told me was the highest rating ever recorded for a collected species, and the motion put to the council was very simple and very final. They were going to end the exhibit. They were going to end us." I read the motion sitting on the floor of a storage compartment in the dark, with the cold, clean station air in my lungs, and I felt fear. Real fear, the kind that wants to make you small and still and quiet. I sat with it for exactly 1 minute. Then I stood up and started working. The Vath Emergency Security Council had given themselves 4 days to implement the termination order for Exhibit 7. I had 3.5. Zeth came to me that night with his eyes wide and his voice very low, and I could see the 11 years of careful, patient planning sitting very close to the surface of him. All of it now being asked to become something it had not finished becoming. He was afraid. Not of dying, of failing, of being the reason it did not work. I understood that fear very specifically. "How many can you reach in 4 days?" "Gen," he said, "all 400. I have already sent the word, but the others, the Drev, the Salathi, the Keshborn workers, I know maybe 60 who will listen, who have listened to me before in small ways." 60 plus 400, I said. "Against how many Vath security personnel on this station?" 800 active duty, 1,200 reserve, but the reserve response time is 11 minutes. I thought about this. The first wave then, if we move before they can call reserves. Zeth nodded slowly. If we move fast and we hit multiple points simultaneously, the first wave is manageable. The Vath security response system is centralized. It routes all priority responses through a single coordination hub on level 6. If that hub is disrupted, the first wave takes 14 minutes to organize a coherent response instead of 4. "You've been thinking about this." "For 11 years, he said. "I have been thinking about this for 11 years. I just never had the proof that the first step was possible." I looked at him. "And now?" "Now I have watched you walk through the middle of their station and disappear before they could reach you. I have watched you revise their threat assessment 7 times in 3 weeks. I have watched beings who had given up the idea of freedom start to talk about it again like it is a real thing." He paused. "Yes, now I believe the first step is possible." I nodded. "Then let's talk about the second step we worked through the night." Zaith had maps. 11 years of mental cartography now laid out in rough drawings on smooth container surfaces. Then transferred to a real planning document on a stolen administrative data slate that he had been holding for exactly this kind of moment. Level by level, corridor by corridor, access points, choke points, timing windows, fallback routes. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1. Simultaneous release of the secondary exhibits. The station held exhibits for 31 species. Not all of them would be in a condition to act. Some had been here too long. Some were too far gone into the comfort of captivity. But the release itself was not about the occupants making a choice. It was about the chaos. 31 habitats opening at once, with unfamiliar species entering the public corridors of the station, was an event the Vath security system had no protocol for. Their protocols assumed escapes happened one at a time and were isolated incidents. 31 simultaneous events would fracture their coordination. Phase 2. Disruption of the Level 6 hub. Zeth had a Gen technical worker named Pell who had spent 9 years servicing the hub's environmental systems and knew the exact location of 3 junction points that, if all 3 were disrupted within a 40-second window, would take the hub's communications offline for approximately 12 minutes. 12 minutes, that was the window. Phase 3. The human habitat. By the time phases 1 and 2 were complete, the habitat would still be locked. But from the inside, the maintenance hatch I had used was a single point. Zeth knew of 2 additional maintenance access points in the northern and eastern walls that could be opened from the outside, with the same 3-point pressure sequence the Vath used. The humans inside would need to choose to come through. I could not force that choice. I could only open the doors. And then there was the 4th thing, which was not officially a phase because I had not told Zeth about it yet. "The High Curator," I said. Zeth went very still. "Is he on the station?" "Curator Voss," Zeth said quietly. Yes, he has been here since the emergency council session, overseeing the termination order personally. Where does he go when a security event is in progress? The secure observation deck on level 9. There is a sealed chamber there designated for senior personnel during high alert situations. And the access route to level 9 from level 4 service corridors. Zeth looked at me for a long moment. You are not planning to hurt him. No, I said. It was true. It had never been part of the plan. I need him to hear something, and I need the station's broadcast array to carry it. The broadcast array is on level 9, Zeth said very slowly, as if the pieces were assembling themselves in front of him as he spoke, adjacent to the secure observation deck. Yes, another long silence. You want to speak to the entire Galactic Compact. I want the Galactic Compact to know that a being they classified as Threat Index 0.3, pre-conflict, non-aggressive, has just taken the command deck of one of their most important installations. I want them to know what that means, not because I am threatening them, because they need to revise their understanding of what is alive in this universe, and what that life is capable of. Zeth sat with this for a very long time. Outside the station continued its enormous noise, its constant movement, its absolute confidence in its own permanence. Finally he said, and the humans in the habitat, the ones who did not come out when the doors opened on Earth, the ones who have been here 40 years. Do you know they will come through when the doors open? No, I said honestly. I cannot know that, and if they do not, then I will leave the doors open, and I will not force anyone through them. But I will not close them either, not ever again. It was the most honest thing I had said since I came through the hatch. Zeth heard the honesty in it. He nodded once, and picked up the data slate again. We planned until the station's lights shifted to their overnight setting. Then Zeth went to do the thing he had been preparing to do for 11 years, which was to walk among the 400 Gen on this station, and tell them that the moment had come. I went to the storage compartment where I had been sleeping, and lay down in the dark and breathed the cold, clean station air, and went over every detail of the plan, every timing sequence, every fallback, until I could feel it in the same part of my memory where I kept the maintenance light, behind the waterfall. 3 hours before the shift change, I was already moving. I want to describe what happened in those 12 minutes with the precision it deserves, because I have told it many times since, and each time I try to make it smaller than it was, and each time the truth resists the simplification. The first thing that happened was the lights in Sector 4 going amber, which was the signal. Pell hit the Level 6 hub junction at 0614 station time, and within 11 seconds the hub's emergency communications went to fragmented backup routing, which meant the 800 security personnel on active duty were suddenly trying to coordinate through a system that was dropping one in 3 signals. 30 seconds after that, the first exhibit seals opened, not all 31 simultaneously. Staggered, in a pattern Zeth's network had designed to create maximum dispersion across the station's public levels. The effect was exactly what we had modeled. The VATH security system tried to classify it as a coordinated escape event and route resources accordingly. But with the hub fragmenting, the routing instructions were contradictory. Units were sent to locations that other units had already been sent to. The floor-level corridors became something the VATH had no protocol for. I was in the service passage behind the atrium when the noise peaked. I could hear it through the walls. Alarms at 3 different pitches, the heavy sound of VATH in full gear moving fast, and underneath it all, something I had not expected: voices. Many voices, not human voices, the voices of species I had only seen from a distance, suddenly in the open corridors of a station that had always told them to stay in their assigned spaces. Some of them sounded afraid. Some of them sounded like something else entirely. I moved to the habitat access points, north wall first. The 3-point sequence opened it in 4 seconds. I pulled the hatch wide and stood in the opening. The habitat interior was lit and alive with motion. Something had changed in there. The people inside had heard the alarms. They were awake and in the open spaces, gathered in the central area near the river, talking in low, urgent voices. A few of them saw the open hatch in the cliff face. Then more of them saw it. I said nothing. I did not need to. I had sent the message 3 days ago. I watched them decide. It was not instant. Nothing like that is ever instant when the thing being decided has been suppressed for 40 years. But it moved. The decision moved through the crowd the way a current moves through water, from person to person, visible in the posture changes, in the turned faces, in the way people began walking north toward the cliff face, and then stopped hesitating and walked faster. The first person through the hatch was a woman named Ada, 41 years old, with short gray hair and the eyes of someone who had been waiting a very long time for a specific thing. She came through, looked at me, looked at the corridor, looked back at the habitat through the open hatch and said, very quietly, I knew it. I opened the east hatch while others came through the north. By the time I returned to the north corridor, there were 4 people in the service passage with me, more coming through every few seconds. The Vath Convergence Guard found us on level 4, 17 minutes into the event, which was 3 minutes longer than their standard response time. They came in a tactical formation, 6 units in 2 columns, moving with the precision of a force that had never lost a containment action. They were fast, and they were well equipped, and they had been trained for exactly this situation. What they had not been trained for was a human who had spent 3 weeks studying every tactical formation they used and designing a response for each one. I had 8 people with me, Ada and 7 others who had in 40 years of captivity, quietly held on to things that the habitat life had not fully softened. One man named Cole, who had been, in a previous time, a structural engineer, and who had looked at the service corridor layout with an engineer's eyes and told me in the first 10 minutes exactly which panels were load-bearing and which were decorative. A younger woman named Nora who ran every morning along the habitat fence line and who was, it turned out, very fast and extremely good at not being where you expected her to be. What happened in that corridor took less than 4 minutes. I will not dwell on the mechanics of it because it was not clean, and it was not simple, and real conflict never is. What I will say is that we used the corridor architecture, the timing, and the absolute disbelief on the part of the Convergence Guard that a group of exhibit animals could have prepared anything at all. They had come in expecting to suppress. They had not come in expecting opposition with a plan. When it was over, 6 Vath Guard units were secured and we had moved to the level 5 stairwell. They did not expect that, Ada said, breathing hard but steady. No, I said. They still don't really, she said. They're still processing that it happened. Good. Let's move before they finish processing. Level 9 took another 20 minutes. Station was loud with its own chaos by then. Zeth's network was active on every level. Gen and Drev and Sulathi workers disrupting systems, rerouting power, opening passages. The Vath command structure was trying to reassemble through a fragmented communication network, and the effort was visible. We passed 3 security stations that were physically present but operationally blind, their personnel staring at screens full of fragmented data and making decisions based on incomplete information. The sealed observation chamber on level 9 had 2 guards, not a tactical unit, station guards, used to a position that had never needed defending. When they saw us, a group of humans, some in habitat clothing, some now in borrowed gray work uniforms, moving with the specific confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going, they did what any rational being does when confronted with something outside the boundaries of their experience. They hesitated. We did not. The chamber door opened. Curator Voss was inside. I had seen photographs of him in the administrative files Zeth had accessed. In person he was taller than I had expected and older-looking, with the pale, dense skin of an elder Vath and hands that were folded in front of him with a deliberate, practiced calm that told me he had decided to perform composure even though he was not in fact calm. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Through the translation chip I still be dead." "Yes," I said. "I should be. Your atmospheric assessment was wrong." "Sit down," he said, as if this was a meeting he had called, as if I was here to receive instructions rather than to give them. I did not sit down. He looked past me at the others in the doorway, at Ada, who looked back at him with an expression I can only describe as patient, at Cole, at Nora, at the others. Then he looked back at me. "You have caused considerable disruption," he said. "Yes, to what end? You cannot hold this station. You have no ships, no weapons system access, no long-range capability. This is a symbolic action. You know it is symbolic." "I know it is not symbolic," I said quietly. "But I understand why you think that. You have been classifying what we are for 40 years. And when you do something long enough it starts to feel true." He was quiet. "Here is what is about to happen," I said. "I am going to use the broadcast array behind you to send a message to every receiving station in the Galactic Compact. I am going to do this because the Compact deserves to know that one of its constituent civilizations has spent 300 years deciding what other species are worth without asking them. And I am going to do it because the species on this station, and on the other 16 ARC stations, deserve to know that someone stood in front of Curator Voss and he had nothing left to say. He did have something left to say. He said it. He offered me the thing I had expected him to offer, a negotiated arrangement, a better habitat, freedom of movement within designated areas, formal recognition of human sapience within the Compact's legal framework, if I would agree to stop the current action and return to an appropriate facility. I let him finish. "You are offering me a better cage," I said. He began to respond. "No," I said, and something in the way I said it closed the conversation so completely that he did not try to reopen it. I turned to the broadcast array. The message I sent was not long. I had composed it in my head over 3 days. In the same careful way I had composed everything that mattered, and I had made it short deliberately, because the most important things do not require much space. I said that I was Kale, a human from Exhibit 7 of the Vathark Station Compound 7. I said that humans had been collected 40 years ago without consent and held without consent, and that this was not an isolated situation but a systemic one that extended to dozens of species across the Compact's 17 arc stations. I said that the current action on Compound 7 was not a hostile act. It was a demonstration. I said, treat all thinking life as free, or deal with what that life is capable of becoming when it is given enough time and enough reason. Then I stopped the broadcast. Curator Voss was still in the room. He was very still. The composure was gone now, the performance of it abandoned, and what was underneath was something I recognized. The look of someone who has built a very large structure on a foundation they assumed would never be tested, and who is now standing in the rubble of that assumption. "You destroyed nothing," he said. It was quiet, not an accusation. Almost confused. "No," I said. "I didn't need to." I left him there and went back down to the open corridors of the station where the work of the next part was already beginning. The Galactic Compact's response to the broadcast took 6 hours to fully organize itself and 3 days to become visible. In those 3 days, Zeth and I and Ada and the others held the station not violently. The Vath security forces were present but uncertain, operating on directives from a high command that was receiving conflicting instructions from 3 different Compact factions and had not yet arrived at a coherent position. Their response was, at its core, bureaucratic. The Vath were a civilization built on process and protocol and hierarchy, and when the process collided with a situation that the protocol had not anticipated, the hierarchy froze. We used the freeze. In the first day, Zeth's network completed what it had started. The Gen on Compound 7 were no longer in their assigned work rotations. They were, for the first time in 60 years, simply in the station's corridors, living in it the way any free being lives in a place, making decisions about where to go without consulting a schedule. The other worker-class species followed by a kind of gravitational logic. When enough beings stopped performing compliance lost its shape and fell apart. There were moments of difficulty. I will not pretend otherwise. 4 years of careful plans will have gaps when they meet reality, and the gaps required improvisation. There was a morning on the second day when a group of younger Vath security units, operating without clear orders from their frozen command structure, moved to seal the Level 3 service corridors in a way that would have cut our freedom of movement in half. I found out about it 20 minutes before it happened, through a Gen runner who had sprinted 4 levels to reach me. I went to the Level 3 corridor with Cole and 2 others, and we sat down in it. Just sat down, in the middle of the corridor. Cross-legged on the floor, the security unit arrived. 6 of them. They looked at us. We looked at them. They did not have an order that covered this. Their orders covered suppression of active resistance. They did not cover 4 people sitting on a floor looking at them calmly. They stood there for 9 minutes, and then they retreated to request clarification from command. And command was still frozen, and the corridor stayed open. Ada, sitting beside me, said very quietly, "That was not in the plan." "No," I said, "it worked anyway." Most things do when you understand what the other side is actually afraid of. What the Vath were afraid of, I had come to understand over those 3 weeks, was not conflict. They had protocols for conflict. What they were afraid of was the thing that had happened here, a situation that existed outside their categories, something they had been certain about being wrong. The uncertainty itself was more threatening to them than any weapon, because their entire structure was built on the assumption of certainty. I had given them maximum uncertainty, and in doing so, I had given our side maximum time. The Compact's response, when it organized itself, was not what the Compact's more aggressive factions had wanted. The faction that called for immediate forceful reassertion of station control was outvoted by 2 others. The first was a pragmatic faction that read the broadcast and the subsequent 3 days of a frozen station, and concluded, correctly, that forceful action would be both costly and unpredictably escalatory. The second was something I had not anticipated but should have, because Zeth had told me about it months earlier, and I had filed it away as background information. There were worlds in the Galactic Compact that had been watching the Arc Station program for a long time. Not collected worlds, free worlds. species that had achieved compact membership through their own means and had, for various diplomatic reasons, never directly challenged the ARC station program, but had also never been fully comfortable with it. When my broadcast went out, those worlds received it. And the public response on those worlds within 48 hours was not what the High Compact Council had expected. Zeth brought me the data on the morning of the second day, reaction summaries from 11 compact member worlds, translated and compressed, but the essential picture was clear. The word that appeared most often, across 11 different languages, was finally. I sat with that word for a long time. I thought about the exhibit animals on the other 16 ARC stations, the ones who had not had a Kale or a Zeth, had not had 11 years of careful mapping and 3 weeks of proved possibility, the ones still inside. I thought about what the broadcast would mean to them if it reached them. And I thought about the practical question of whether it would, and I thought about the fact that Zeth's communication relay was not the only one in the compact, and that the beings on those other stations might have their own versions of what Zeth had spent 11 years building. Probably. Probably not all of them, but probably some. On the third day, a compact diplomatic vessel docked at Compound 7, not a military vessel. A white ship with the compact's diplomatic insignia, carrying 3 representatives from different member factions, requesting formal dialogue. I went to meet them with Ada and Zeth on either side of me. Ada wore the gray habitat clothes she had come through the hatch in, because she had decided she was not going to change them for this. Zeth wore his standard gray work uniform because he had decided the same thing. I wore what I had been wearing since the day I came through the maintenance hatch. Gray, plain, unmarked. The senior diplomatic representative was a Vath, which was expected, because the Vath chaired the compact in this cycle and diplomatic protocol, required a Vath lead her name. Through the translation chip was something I could not pronounce, and she introduced herself simply as the Voice, which was the diplomatic title. She looked at me with an expression that was very different from Curator Voss's composure performance. She looked at me with what I can only describe as professional attention, the look of someone whose job is to find workable solutions, and who has already assessed that workable is still possible here. You have made your position very clear, she said. Yes, I said, the compact needs time to formalize a response. Legal structures for species reclassification, compensatory frameworks for displaced populations, independent monitoring for the other stations. She paused. These things take time. I am asking for your patience. How much time, I asked. Minimum 2 years for legislative process. 2 years, I said. The humans on 17 stations get 2 more years in cages while the compact runs its process. If you prefer the alternative, she said quietly. The alternative is a formal military response that ends this conversation and sets every reclassification effort back by decades. It was a fair point. I did not like it, but it was fair. And I had not come this far by being too proud to acknowledge a fair point from someone sitting across the table from me. This station, I said. The humans here, the Gen here, every species on this station, free and out by the end of this month. Agreed, she said without hesitation, which told me it had already been agreed before she walked in. Formal compact recognition of human sapience, ratified within 60 days. Agreed. Independent observers from non-Vath member worlds on all 17 stations, beginning within 30 days, with direct reporting to the Compact Council and public access to all reports. She paused at that one, long enough for me to know it was the one they had not pre-agreed. Then she said, 60 days for observer deployment. 30, I said. 45, she said. Done, I said. Ada, beside me, let out a breath she had been holding. The meeting lasted another 2 hours, and covered more detail than I will recount here. By the end of it, what had been called an illegal occupation of a compact facility was being formally recategorized in the session documents as an exceptional civil disturbance arising from unresolved legal ambiguities in the compact's species classification framework, which was a very long way of saying that the compact had decided it was more useful to call this something other than what it was, because calling it what it was required acknowledging things they were not yet ready to acknowledge, officially, but were already acknowledging in every other way. I did not mind the language. Language would catch up, it always does. On the 7th day after the breakout, I went back to the habitat. I had not been back since the morning I opened the hatch. Others had gone back and forth in the days between, carrying messages, escorting people through who had decided to come through. But I had not gone back myself, and I was not entirely sure, walking down the maintenance corridor toward the waterfall, why I had been avoiding it. I came through the hatch into the habitat. The dome lights were in their afternoon setting, gold and long-shadowed. The trees were green, and the river ran clearly, and the birds in the canopy, the speakers in the canopy, were doing their reliable impression of a living forest. Most of the people were still here. I had known that was likely. I had told Zeth on the night we made the plan that I would not force anyone through the doors. I had meant it. I still meant it. But seeing it, maybe 60 people still living in the habitat, children playing near the river, adults sitting in the shade, it was a different thing than knowing it abstractly. A woman came over to me, older than my mother. I did not know her name. She looked at me with an expression I had seen before on certain faces in the habitat, the expression of someone who has already made their decision and has made their peace with it. "It is a nice place," she said. "It always has been." "Yes," I said, "it has." "I am too old," she said. "Out there I would be a refugee. Here at least I know where everything is." She paused. "Is the door staying open?" "Yes," I said. "The door is staying open forever. No one will ever close it again." She nodded. "Then we are not trapped. We are just staying." The distinction mattered to her. I understood why. I nodded and left her there in the afternoon light. I found my mother, near the northern tree line, sitting on a stone by the spring I had used since I was 14, the spring that tasted like nothing, that tasted clean. She looked up at me when I came through the trees. She looked at me for a long time. "You did it," she said. "We did it," I said. "It was not just me. It never is, but someone has to open the door first." I sat down beside her on the stone. We sat in silence for a while. The fake bird sounds were very good, as always. The spring made its small noise. Through the trees, far away, I could hear the muffled sound of the station going about the new business of its changed reality. "Are you coming out?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Not today, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. I need to say goodbye to this place properly. I have lived here my whole adult life." "I understand," I said, and I did. "Kale," she said, "what is it like out there? What does it actually look like?" I thought about how to answer that. The atrium, the transport lanes, the 12 levels of a civilization going about its vast ordinary life, the stars through the observation deck, the real stars, not painted ones, so many of them and so far away that the distance felt like a kind of conversation rather than a void. "Big," I said. "It is very big and loud, and it smells like metal and something floral I still do not have a name for, and the stars are real." She was quiet, then she said, "Real stars. Real stars, as many as you want. You can look at them as long as you like." She looked down at the spring water for a moment. Then she looked back up at the dome above us, the painted stars already beginning to show faintly as the afternoon light shifted toward evening. "Tomorrow," she said. "I will come tomorrow." I stood up. I squeezed her hand and walked back through the trees and through the open hatch, back into the service corridor, back toward the station and its noise, and its new and complicated life that was waiting for all of us. I came out onto the observation deck on level 12 near the end of the station's evening cycle. Zeth was already there. He had found the spot before me and stood at the railing with his arms folded, looking out at the stars. I stood beside him and looked at them. They were exactly as many as I had imagined them, exactly as real as I had hoped. They did not perform. They did not cycle on a timer. They did not require a speaker to pretend to be something they were not. They were just there, endlessly, in all directions, doing the same thing they had been doing for longer than any civilization in this galaxy had been counting. "What happens now?" Zeth said, not anxiously, just asking. "Now the compact processes," I said. "Now people file documents and hold sessions and write the legal language for things that have already happened. Now the other stations get their observers, and then, eventually, their open doors. Now the Gen send someone home and find out what home looks like after 60 years. Now the humans who want to leave figure out where to go. And the humans who want to stay figure out what staying freely means." "And you?" I thought about it. The honest answer was that I did not know. I had spent 9 years planning as far as the open door and 3 weeks improvising. Past it and past that the plan had always been, figure it out when you get there. "I do not know yet," I said, "but I know the door is open. That is enough for now." Zeth nodded. He was quiet for a while, then he said, 11 years. "Yes," I said. 11 years of mapping corridors and learning schedules and waiting for the first step to become possible." He paused. "If you had not opened that hatch, I think I would have spent 11 more years." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you would have found your own door. People usually do when the need is real enough." "Maybe," he said. We stood there in the quiet of the observation deck and looked at the real stars. There were so many of them that counting was not the right relationship to have with them. You did not count them. You simply looked, and the looking told you something important about the scale of things and the smallness of any one cage, no matter how well it was built. I had been afraid, once, that the outside would be too large, That it would press down on me the way confined spaces press down on some people. An excess of space instead of a lack of it. I had worried about this in the habitat, lying awake near the waterfall, wondering whether I had been inside for too long to handle what was outside. I had not needed to worry. The stars did not press down on me. They did not demand anything. They were simply there, the way things are that have existed longer than anyone's idea of what you are supposed to be. I was 23 years old. I had been born in a cage. I had watched a civilization decide what I was worth and write the number down and file it in a document and call it knowledge. The number had been 0.3. I looked at the stars and thought about that number, and about the meetings and the documents, and the formal compact sessions that were already being scheduled, and about the open doors on 17 stations, and about my mother who would come through her door tomorrow, and about Ada who was somewhere on level 4 reorganizing the Gen work rotations into something voluntary, and about Cole who had already requested access to the station's structural schematics because he was, at his core, an engineer who could not look at a building without wanting to understand it. I thought about all of it, and then I stopped thinking and just looked at the stars for a while. Because some things do not need to be resolved into a conclusion. Some things are allowed to simply be what they are. We stayed on the deck for a long time, Zeth and I, two beings from two very different cages, watching the universe do nothing in particular in the most beautiful way possible. The station hummed below us. The doors were open. We had all the time in the world.